Good evening. Welcome. Lovely that so many of you could join us for tonight. We'll just give it another few seconds for folks to join us from the waiting room. Do you guys see anybody else from the waiting room that we should wait for?
I just see one right now.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We've got lots to cover tonight. So welcome everybody. My name is Tasha Murray. I'm the Executive Director of the Invasive Species Council of Metro Vancouver. And also co-hosting this stewardship session is Grace Nombrado, who works with me at the ISCMV, and also Andy Ferguson with the Stanley Park Ecology Society. So hopefully you're in the right place for a stewardship session today focused on eco art. And it is my privilege to work and live and join you today from the unceded territories of the Squamish and Halkah speaking peoples. And we're talking about eco art today, which is not a new thing. It might be a new thing for some of you, but I do want to acknowledge that the utility of plants has been known by Indigenous peoples for time immemorial. In fact, their relationship with plants goes beyond plant utility. And as a person of settler origin, I strive to be in relationship with plants the way that Indigenous peoples are. We have so much to learn about how Indigenous peoples have used and continue to use plants. So hopefully that'll be part of our discussion today as well. Just a note that this session is being recorded. So if you hear something that you want to revisit or you want to share this recording with somebody else, in about a week or so, you'll get a reminder message from me with the link for the recording, along with any of the other links or resources that are shared during the session. So you have one place to find all of those after the session is over. This is part of a series. So the stewardship series for Metro Vancouver was started a number of years ago by my organization and the Stanley Park Ecology Society. And we have one more session coming up on November 28th, also online. And that session is going to be focused on youth perspectives in stewardship. And if you go to our website right now, iscmv.ca/events, you can register for that session. We'll have a number of youth stewards who will be coming to share the work that they're doing. And we hope that you can join us and bring along some youth that you might work with as well. It'll be a really engaging dialogue. So this is the agenda for today. Whoops, before I do that, actually, I wanted to speak a little bit about the collection and use of invasive plants. So this is kind of like the rules portion of the session. I'm obligated to share some information about how to do this work safely and sustainably. I would consider the use of invasive plants as cultural control. So it's a way to decrease small amounts of invasive plants from the environment, and also a really interesting way to repurpose them and to engage the public in this conservation issue. However, this work must be done thoughtfully and also legally. And so I'd like to share a few thoughts on how to do this well. Our friends at the Sea to Sky Invasive Species Council also have a webpage on using invasive plants for arts and crafts that is also worth a read, and I'll be sure to share that link with you afterwards. So first, do not grow or purchase invasive plants. If you can't find a specific plant that you want to use for a craft, contact an expert like me for advice on an appropriate site, or consider another type of plant or activity. One of the tricky things about using invasive plants for these kinds of projects is possibly encouraging or increasing the desire for these plants. And we definitely want to discourage folks from ever planting them or maintaining them, because after all, they still are invasive plants. Second, you want to understand invasives in your region. So some of the invaders that are in Metro Vancouver are toxic. So you need to be informed about safety precautions that you might need to take in order to keep yourself and your team safe. The co-hosts and presenters for this specific session are all based in the Metro Vancouver region of BC, although there are others joining this session that are from other regions in BC and also across Canada, which is super awesome. The priority plants in Metro Vancouver and the removal and disposal methods may be different in Metro Vancouver than in other parts of BC or even Canada. And some of the experts on this call can be a resource for you if you have questions about where you live. If you need help to find an expert in your region, you can start with me and I'll try and connect you with folks like us, wherever it is that you might be working. You absolutely also need permission from the landowner prior to removal or harvesting of plants. So if it's your own property, of course, you can do it. But if you're working in a natural area or a park, you definitely need to have permission from the landowner for a number of different reasons. First of all, there might be a safety hazard or issue at the site that you might not be aware of. Second, there might be an active area for treatment. So the invasive plants might be part of a larger project where there are activities happening by other practitioners or stewards, and you don't want to interfere with any of that planned work or perhaps research or those types of projects. Also, there may be areas where the invasive plants are undergoing herbicide treatment, and you definitely wouldn't want to be harvesting in those kinds of sites either. In the Metro Vancouver region, if you're collecting from a Japanese beetle regulated area, and we have 3 of them in Vancouver, Burnaby, and Port Coquitlam, you would also need to know the restrictions on the movement of the material outside of those regions. And so again, understanding kind of what's happening in your specific region is really important. We also want to avoid unintentional consequences. There was actually a case a couple of years ago in our region where an eco artist created artwork in obscure places in a park and then invited people to find them. And this project really blew up on social media. And the art pieces were not located on primary trails, and hundreds of people ended up visiting this park over a series of weeks, and they came walking into natural areas and creeks and trampled a lot of native plants. They impacted streams and caused hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage, which is really difficult to restore. It takes years and years and years. And so although the artist would have had great intentions to get people outside seeking for the art pieces, it wasn't in alignment with what was planned for that park. And so that's an example of where you need to be really careful about how you're promoting your artwork, and again, what areas you're working in. One way to connect with source materials, if you do want to harvest some of these plants, is to work with stewardship groups who already have permission with landowners to be removing these. And we have a list of stewardship groups on our website for all across Metro Vancouver if you'd like to connect with any of those. We also want to be mindful of the impact that your work might have on ecosystems. If you've considered all the items I've just mentioned and you're able to do the removal or harvesting, you want to consider what prevention practices you have in place to prevent the spread of invasive plants and seed parts while you're conducting your work. There's also a link on my website, which I'll share, to prevention practices, and there are many different websites that talk about prevention of invasive species. A prevention practice may be as simple as cleaning your tools or the bottom of your shoes prior to leaving a site so that you don't track those unwanted plant parts and seeds into another site. And finally, you want to remove invasive plants properly. You want to use best practices for your region because techniques are often species specific. Again, understanding the protocols and those best practices for your region, in particular for the plants that you want to work on, is really key. So that was a lot of information, and I want to pause for a moment and invite Andy to share some of the considerations that he has for his work when he's doing stewardship work in Stanley Park.
Yeah, so Tasha's list super thorough. I can share a bit of insights from kind of like the work we do in Stanley Park. And one thing I'd want to emphasize is that point about getting approval first. So coming up with a plan like this and then presenting that to whatever city, if you're on public territory, or if it's a private landowner and things like that, showing that you have a plan really helps in getting that approval process. In Stanley Park, we have an added concern that some other public places likely have as well of archaeology. There's many, many archaeological sites in the park. So every area I work in needs to be vetted by city archaeologists and stuff. So it's one of the reasons why we always want people to go through the proper channels. You don't want to disturb something like that. And so that's another concern to add to this list and why it's important to either see if groups already have approval in an area, or if they don't, then getting in touch with the city and seeing um, like what sort of rules they have to go through. But my experience, at least with City of Vancouver, they're very supportive of this sort of thing. They want the community to get involved in nature, and they like these eco art programs and stuff. So if you have a plan ready and you make sure you're following best practices, you make sure you're getting approval from the city, hopefully it goes pretty well. And at least Stanley Park is one of those Japanese beetle zones. So it's important to look into all of these different considerations for projects you're doing. But if you do, hopefully it goes well.
Mhm. Thanks, Andy. And yeah, in covering this material, we don't want to discourage you from doing this kind of work. We just want you to have these considerations in mind before you go out. I think a lot of members of the public think that, oh, they're invasive plants. That means that you have free reign to target them anywhere at any time. But you do need to consider some of these things before you embark on any, on-ground work or removals. All right, so let's get into the agenda. So we have a panelist of 3 artists that have joined us today. And we're going to do introductions first. So they're going to introduce themselves, and then we'll review with each of them some of the examples of eco art that they've been working on. And then they'll share some techniques and perhaps a demo about some of the work that they're doing. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. So if you do have questions or discussion topics, please pop those into the chat, and we'll have time to revisit those at the end. These are our panelists, and I'll share in the chat in a moment the link to this event page where you can read their complete bios. We have Joshua Ralph, Grace Nombrado, and Sam Alder. And just a reminder for those that might have joined us a little bit late, this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording, as well as all the links and resources shared during the session, will be on the landing page for this website. I'll send a reminder email within a week. And so you'll have access to all of those things after tonight. And finally, this is contact information for Andy and myself, who are the co-hosts for the stewardship session. So if you have ideas for future events, or if you have any follow-up questions about the series, feel free to contact us after today. And with that, I would like to turn towards our eco art panelist and first invite Grace to introduce herself. Good evening, Grace.
Hi, Tasha. Thank you so much. And thank you, Andy, for welcoming us today. Yes, I'm Grace Nombrado. I am Communication Coordinator for the Invasive Species Council, and I also am Executive Director of my own nonprofit in South Vancouver called Free the Fern. So my background is actually in elementary teaching, surprisingly. I didn't actually know a lot about environmental eco art and this invasive species world until about 3 or 4 years ago. And then I basically stumbled across it because I moved to my neighborhood in South Vancouver, where there's a trail system that runs right behind my home. And I discovered all the native plants and the invasive plants in that trail and started my own nonprofit to take care of that trail system. And then I discovered actually basket weaving with ivy through taking a workshop with another nonprofit called Still Moon Arts. So Still Moon Arts runs basket weaving workshops. I took that workshop myself, and then I learned the skill. And since then, I've been passing that skill on and teaching others through local workshops and in the community centers nearby as well. So I look forward to sharing a little bit of the knowledge that I've gained today with you guys, and encourage you to always try and learn new things. And it's never too late to try something new.
Great, thanks, Grace. Sam, would you like to go next and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sam. How to introduce myself? I'm a settler on these lands. I've lived here almost my entire life. I come from Swiss, Romanian, British, Swedish, and Ulster Irish ancestry. trying to get more specific with those, know my roots. I have tried to be a lifelong learner. I was raised unschooled and got to pursue my own passions for a very long time, and then entered the college system studying engineering, robotics. Towards the end of that degree, I found out that the only job opportunities that I could really find in that field were around resource extraction. And I had already at that point started putting 2 and 2 together about how little of that we can continue doing without figuring out circularity. And so I ended up going to a local art and design university, and yeah, studied industrial design. Felt weird about purchasing new materials for making furniture, started looking for other options, and that's how I got to where I am today. I think that's my whole introduction. Thanks.
Thank you. Joshua, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hello, I'm Joshua, and thank you so much for having me. I am a settler and uninvited guest on these lands. I was born in southern Manitoba, being Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional and ancestral lands, the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, as well as the homelands of the Red River Métis. And with that, I actually ended up growing up primarily on Treaty 6 territory, which is just north of what's colonially known as Edmonton. So I've been experimenting with ways to use invasive plants for the past 2 years thereabouts. Being said, I am very much a layman, and I am also very honored to be here and be in such great company with everyone joining us today. And this practice, I do believe, to come from a little bit of a selfish perspective for myself. It really stemmed from this huge need weighing down on me to do something palpable for the environment, which saw through earlier than 2 years ago to start partaking in invasive species removals. That lasted a little bit and it was all fine and dandy, but with that, it also very quickly started to weigh on me again that I was consciously ending the lives of these plants that didn't choose to be planted where they were sprouted. And what exactly I guess that meant was what I was trying to unpack. And as a way to understand that and this kind of newfound relationship, I started to look at the piles of these dying plants after you come away from these restoration events and asking, do they just need to sit here and rot? And yeah, a little bit of a long story short, I came to do eco art workshops around kind of community here in South Vancouver. And that's primarily on sustainable art supplies using these invasive plants, being paper, drawing ink, as well as printmaking ink, charcoal, and that's using, English ivy, Himalayan blackberry, black locust, European mountain ash, reed canary grass, to name a few.
Thank you. So now I'd like to invite the artist to share some examples of the eco art that they have created.
All right, thank you, Tasha. So as I mentioned before, I took a wonderful workshop on basket weaving with invasive ivy from the group Still Moon Arts. And so I'll just show you some examples of baskets that you can make out of the ivy. So here's a pretty typical shaped traditional basket that you would make in a workshop that we would run. But surprisingly enough, whenever we run a workshop, they always end up looking different. So everybody in the workshop comes away looking completely different. So someone else might have one that looks like this shape, slightly smaller. It could end up taller and longer. This is kind of the shape to hold pencils in and markers and things like that on your table. And if you choose not to bend that, the ivy at all, it actually would turn out to be flat. So it could be like a pot holder or a coaster on your coffee table. And I always have a few of these handy beside me to put my coffee on. And those are great. And then if you want to get really nice and fancy, you could put your plant in after. It's actually a fake plant. Sorry, I betrayed my cause of Free the Fern, but this is actually an IKEA plant. But anyway, you can have this in your home, and you can share a gift with someone in a ivy woven basket. So those are some examples. Pass it on to Joshua. Do we want to do, or Sam? Sam's going to go next. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. I'm going to share my screen, which is going to take me only a moment to figure out. Oh, actually, maybe we'll pass it on to Joshua first.
Sure, no
I'm
worries.
just going to figure one thing out.
I can show some things on my screen here, but I'm just going to plop 2 pictures in the chat. Hopefully this works. They're just small pictures, so it's probably not worth doing a screen share. But yeah, first one being, when it loads, you'll see it in a second, is horse chestnut and morning glory. Horse chestnut isn't technically invasive. There are a ton of them on my street though, and being a street tree, they're not doing too great. They kind of never do. They fell a lot of branches. And so that's cutting from that with Morning Glory cordage. I think it's still uploading. You'll see it in a second. Second one, which did pop up though, is some paper that was made primarily from reed canary grass with a bit of recycled paper in there to mix with the pulp so that it can stick together. I do as well recently partnered with Still Moon Art Society to offer these monoprinting workshops where we took invasive species and as well with the ink made from, this would have been European mountain ash. Yeah, we were able to print off some morning glory leaves as well as tansy. We had some knotweed there at the time. Ooh, a number of others, some Herb Robert, but was able to do that as a public workshop just 2 weekends ago. And I'll hand it back to Sam here.
Okay, screen sharing should work now. So the project that I did at the end of my schooling was to make these drop spindles, which are composed of a walnut stem, and then the rest of it is pressed from blackberry bramble mixed with agar and a couple other ingredients. And one of the focuses I had for my design work was around energy systems. I was very, very interested in how we're going to generate electricity from renewables. And one of the more accessible ways to do so is with solar concentrators. And so I pressed the bramble, I produced these bramble spinning tops with the heat concentrated from a polished satellite dish, which I'm very glad I got to do. And I now use electricity coming out from the wall to heat everything, but I would go back to this at some point in the future. Since then, I have started producing more items, so more of the spinning tops, which, yeah, about a year ago now, at the Culture Crawl, I was lucky enough to share many of these with people who came by. I haven't produced as many this year, but that is because I'm moving on to working on a larger furniture piece. So this is the first piece of furniture I produced. It is almost entirely composed of blackberry brambles. The legs and the sides are entirely blackberry bramble. The top is jointed between boards with some walnut again, which is a lovely material to complement the blackberry. And yeah, the last example I'm going to show is just an upcoming project, which is making the whorls for drop spindles from blackberry bramble as well, similar to the spinning tops. And this is Sharon Callis of Earth Hand Gleaner Society practicing with it, because I am not a competent spinster yet, but I will continue to work on that. So that's my examples. Thanks.
Thank you. So now we'll move into some more details about the techniques that the artists are using to create some of the pieces that they just showcased. You want to go first, Grace?
Sure. So to make it really easy for everybody to try this at home, we actually have filmed an instructional YouTube video on how to make baskets out of ivy. And I think Tasha might be able to share that in the chat. But if you just look up ivy weaving or ivy basket weaving on YouTube, it's probably one of the only instructional videos that are out there. So it breaks down all the steps because I can't show that all on a Zoom session. So usually I run workshops in person just so that I can actually go up and help people with the process. It's a nice kind of interactive process of learning together. And you can do these workshops outside or indoors. I've run both. You can do workshops where participants collect the ivy directly from the area they're working in, or you can collect the ivy before the workshop and bring it to your participants for them to use. So both options, it's really nice and flexible, works in a lot of situations. So the type of technique of weaving is called twining. That's the weaving style of making the basket. And there's three main steps to doing this technique. First is the collecting phase, where you're going to collect the ivy. The second is the prepping, so preparing the ivy. And then the last is the weaving. That's the fun part. So the collecting phase, of course, is going to happen in consultation, like Tasha said, with the landowner, either the city, if it's your own property with ivy, yourself would be the landowner, or you can also consult with a stewardship group who has a relationship already with the city whose land they're working on. So because I run my own nonprofit and I have permission from the city to collect the ivy there, I'm lucky enough because I have a limitless supply of ivy to use for this weaving. So when we collect it, we always collect it from the ground. So ivy obviously can also climb trees. Best practice, no matter what, whether you're weaving or just removing ivy, is never pull ivy off a tree. So we're going to always collect it from the ground. And generally that's younger ivy on the ground. And we're going to be looking for two types of stems when we're collecting for weaving. The first type of stem we're going to be looking for is like a woody stem. So when you collect it, you probably see it on the ground and it's brown and it's a little bit stiffer, but it still can be bent. It's not too thick that it can't bend. So that's woody. And the other type of ivy we're going to look for is the green, flexible, thinner ivy. So we need those two for collecting. And when you collect them, the woody ones, you're going to collect 6 cut stems to make one basket. So each of these are about 1.5 feet long to 2 feet long. The longer you get, obviously, the bigger your basket will be. If you cut it really short, you're going to have a little basket. So we cut 6 of those stems. And then for the flexible green ones, we can also have 6 of those to make one basket. So those ones are longer. You need to have the green ones to be quite long, maybe up to 4 feet long for the green flexible ones. And so the general technique for twining is you start with these 6 woody ones, you cross them like a cross, and you're holding it with your thumb in place so that it's not moving. And then you're going to take that flexible green weaver that you've pulled all the leaves off of, obviously, and you've trimmed any root parts off with one of your handy clippers. You can trim everything off so it's all clean. And then we just loop the green flexible weaver over top. And the whole technique with twining is just twisting so that whatever is in the back comes to the front, and whatever is in the front goes to the back. So it's a twisting and bringing forward movement. So we have it hooked around one side, we twist, so we bring one forward and we bring the other side of the weaver back. And we're going to delicately rotate. It's hard to share this on a screen probably, but like I say, we have a YouTube video as well that really shows this technique really well. So we go bringing it forward and back and rotating the woody stems. And the idea is just to make a full rotation, moving one of the green weaver back and one to the front. And I'll show you what it looks like once I've done that. So there's a good image of it. It looks like a box. So it's taken forward and then it goes back and forward, wrapping around just to hold those stems in place. And that's the very beginning step of the weaving. And then you're going to do the same thing going forward and back, but around each individual woody stem. So you're just twisting it, moving it forward and back, wrapping it around the woody stems and just rotating it in a circle. So it's just going round and round, round and round. And when you do this, it becomes meditative. So it's kind of like people who knit, who just kind of do it as a form of relaxation. When you weave, you kind of just become automatic with the movements. And in a weaving session, in a workshop, people can kind of relax together, chat with the people beside them, and connect while they're doing it. So you're just wrapping it forward, back, around and around. And I'm not going to be able to show you, obviously, a completed basket, but that gives you the general first steps of doing it. So forward, back, all the way around. And eventually it's holding your stems together. And the bottom of your basket is what is going to be happening here. So that's how you make the shape of the bottom of your basket. And you continue rotating around and around. And eventually, if you leave it flat like this, it ends up as a flat shape. If you end up bending your stems as you're weaving, it develops a rounded basket shape. So you'll just bend the stems and it'll form into a basket. So that's the basic weaving technique for twining. And I'll pass it on to Sam. Would you like to go next to share a basic technique? Thank you.
I will use some photos again. So as has already been talked about several times, one of the first most important steps is thinking about where you're gathering from. And so I've got an ongoing relationship with the Means of Production Garden at North China Creek Park in Vancouver, well, so-called Vancouver. And so I've been able to do a lot of my harvesting over the last year at that site. So this is probably the largest harvest I did just on my own. I've also collected after other invasive pulls, and that always gives a really, it's amazing to be able to borrow from the work of all the volunteers. But one of the things I've focused on, especially when I'm doing cuts, is thinking about what I'm giving back to the place. So one of the things I focused on is looking at the trees that are suffering a little bit under the mass of brambles and trying to pull a bit of that down off of them and focus on that first, rather than trying to get as much as possible for myself, or rather than trying to like clear large areas. I'm trying to approach it as a slow functional process and figuring out what's the most helpful part that I can play, role that I can play in the ecosystem. And after harvesting, I often end up back at my studio and I need a way to separate the skin of the plant off because it has a waxy waterproof layer, which is really great for making them durable and long lasting. And it gets in the way of my process, which where I'm trying to glue them together. So I won't play the whole video, but this is this is one of the machines that I've developed to try and process brambles with a little bit less effort on my part. So the various different machines I've made work in a range of different ways. They all have pluses and minuses. I haven't figured out the perfect machine for this yet. But I've had a lot of fun trying to develop those. And so after that, it's still a bit of effort to take those skins off and get them ready for the next step. But the next step in the process, which actually is part of the functional way of gluing them together, is dyeing them. So they need to be dyed in an iron-rich bath, and the irons and tannins added to the woody material actually become part of the gluing process later. Oh, sorry, I should open these all at once. But then the other key step is to put them into an agar bath. So here I've got them bundled exactly the size of, I believe it's a 50-gallon drum, the food grade barrels that you see all around the city. So I've cut open a couple of those and converted them into cooking vessels to be able to process these larger, you know, like 4 kilograms of material all at once. And here's a photo of the one that I made that is insulated, which saves a huge amount of energy. I'm very, very pleased with this device. And then once they've gone through the agar process, adding that agar, which is a starch, which becomes one of the key ingredients in binding them, they have to be given a form with heat and pressure. And so this is one part of one of the molds. This is for the side of my table. And I've been machining these in-house, which has eaten up a huge amount of time. It's not the easiest way to do things. It would have been easier to go to someone else, but I really like the process of learning new things. So I took that on. Pardon the noise. If anyone's listening on headphones, I'll turn it down, but be warned, there's an air compressor running. Hopefully it's not too bad. So this is closing the mold. This will generally take about 30 minutes per piece. There's 4 legs, 4 sides, and then something like 8 top boards, depending on how it's configured. And that process could easily be sped up, but it's not always about doing things as fast as possible. And then it's to the wood shop to do assembly once all the pieces are ready. So yeah, I've actually got 5 side pieces there because some of them came out flawed, some of them came out better, some worse. And then, yeah, this is almost ready, almost a finished table. So that is my technique. And I will pass it along.
Awesome. So my techniques really vary depending on what plants are being used or what the end result I'm looking for is. And it's just across these projects, as I do focus a lot on community engagement, very much like in-person involvement and teaching these skills to others. I do have instruction sheets just for better instruction. And yeah, I really look for ways to involve others' creativity, and that's very much at the forefront of just this project and trying to bring forward this ability to allow others to be creative in making their own art supplies with these invasive species. They can just then go on their ways and be equipped with tools for art making that they themselves can now fairly easily replicate, as art supplies are generally either very wasteful or very expensive or both sometimes. And yeah, I guess the techniques I use, I think, bring the example projects to maybe like 50%, 51, like it's a passing grade, but I kind of just want to bring forward this is just an example that I bring forward to show how to make something, but everyone can come away with that gleaning more, probably knowing more about the process than I do for the most part is what I'd hope for. And I do have connections through Everett Crowley Park Committee on very similar to Sam is, of course, myself doing this with the help of volunteers who are pulling up many of these plants. And my side note, but my last house also had so many invasive species, couldn't really do a ton about it because that was all the greenery in the front. My landlord would have noticed there were so many invasive trees, but you use what you have and what you can get away with. So yes, I am making definitely a conscious effort to collect what can't propagate, is targeting these plants when they're definitely not flowering, only interacting with the leaves or just only interacting with a dead plant. And yeah, when I'm transporting to do these workshops, it's really ensuring the plant is not going to make more. There's enough of them around already, as Tasha had noted earlier. Yeah, I don't know if I would consider this practice I do to be technique based in so much that it is just a merging ground between art and ecology, or at least an attempt at that. And yeah, just trying to get others to at least think about those intersections. At least that's my goal. I can maybe go into a bit of a demo. I didn't have any pictures or anything presented for this, but my demo is fairly quick. So if it's okay to merge those, I might hop into that. All right, so what did I want to say about this? I do have an example pencil here made from blackberry, and this would be European mountain ash as the charcoal. I did need to note, I can in good conscience take credit for the vast majority of my other projects, not the blackberry pencils. This was at the very start of sort of me getting into the eco art realm, is looking for inspiration online. Found somebody, I believe they were from Australia, if I'm not mistaken, functionally made something almost identical to this, would have been with completely different plants, something in Australia. I don't know if they were using invasive plants, but I saw very similar pictures of this and took from that and thought, can I glean the information from this and sort of see if there's a way to use invasive plants to make something similar. So being said, not my original idea by any means, but I can go through a really quick demo here of how to make this from blackberry, and the black locust as the charcoal. Is you'll have your blackberry shoot. You're going to want fairly thick one. This is really long. You'd want to cut this one in half, and of course take the prickles off, because you wouldn't want to be drawing with that. That'll give you just the basis. And in this example here, I did do a bit of, I guess you could call it shaving, just with a knife. Kind of makes it a bit more, it can give some cool textures to it, I suppose, make it look a little bit more like a pencil, but that's very much up to what you're wanting to do. We've got the black locust here with its very intense spikes. First, you remove the spikes, and I apologize, I'm not sponsored by Alcan. I didn't want to open this just for this. So this is some tinfoil. We're going to pretend I'm unwrapping some tinfoil right now. I don't want to waste it, so we're not going to open it. You'd wrap this in some tinfoil and put it over high heat. Generally, I would suggest doing it outside. It's going to create a lot of smoke, which is part of the process. So put it on the barbecue, wrapped in tinfoil, and have that either on some sort of tray or platform. I generally put them in like a frying pan. High heat for about 10 minutes. You'll wait until the smoke subsides. As I mentioned, there's going to be so much smoke. Wait until that dies down for about a minute or two. Take it out, and you'll be left with a bunch of these charcoal pieces, which you can then plop into the end of your pencil, and there you have it.
Great, thank you. So before we move into questions, was there anything else that the artists wanted to share, or things that you might have missed, or other ideas that you wanted to present at this time?
I'll
All
just
right,
jump in.
well, oh,
Oh,
yeah,
I was
sorry,
just going to
Grace.
jump in and say how inspiring it is to see these other eco artists here, as well as other eco artists in the community, and just to let people know that this process of developing eco arts, much like Joshua talked about, it's an open-ended way of developing new types of art through the plants. So it's wonderful art form because it's not very limited, and you can always create new things out of it and inspired by each other and the plants around you. So don't be afraid to experiment and try new things. For example, Joshua is going to be partnering with my own nonprofit to help with making some lanterns out of invasive holly. So we do a lantern workshop in the winter. So there's another use of an invasive plant. You could use it to make lanterns and light up a beautiful trail where you used to have the plant that was just causing harm to the trail. So there's so many new uses you can find with some creativity and a little inspiration from those around you. So thank you so much to those artists who shared, because I really get inspired by all of you.
And I wanted to mention too that we have some amazing artists here, but there are other artists doing work in Metro Vancouver and probably other regions as well. So this is an area of interest that's really growing in the region. So there are invasive species folks like me that are getting involved. There are ecologists and people that come more from, the cultural and arts background. And so I love that we have a diversity of artists here that, represent this kind of movement that's happening, I think, in Metro Vancouver. And thank you all for inspiring us with your works, quite different projects you're all working on. And I love the way that you present that your works are all in progress. If we were to do this session a year from now, you'd probably have different things to tell us and different projects to share. So next I'm going to pass it on to Andy, and he's going to facilitate sort of the discussion and question portion of the session. So if you have any questions, you can pop those into the chat.
Cool. Yeah, as Tasser said, put any questions you have for the artists in the chat. While we wait for some to come in, we'll go over some of our prepared questions. So I know a few of you covered this in your presentations, but what are some of the challenges you have with using invasive plants in your eco art? I know Sam had that machine to peel off the skin that was quite interesting. There's a few other ones. So are there any challenges that you didn't touch on already that have come up while using invasive plants in your art?
I could jump in there. I was just collecting the ivy for the basket weaving today, and it was pouring rain outside. So one challenge, I guess, could be you're collecting it from outside and it's unpredictable. The nice thing about ivy weaving, though, is you can collect it at any season of the year. If you're very brave, you can go into the snow and collect it even, and it still will be made into a basket perfectly. So the challenge for me is sometimes the environment you're getting into. The labor that's required is sometimes a bit time consuming and intense. Partnering with other stewardship groups is great, because then maybe some of the volunteers can help with the collection of the material, so you're not doing it all by yourself, because it does take a lot of labor to collect enough to even run like a workshop. So when I run a basket weaving workshop, I can spend an hour and a half minimum, sometimes more, just to collect some ivy for the workshop. So you're going to take some time to actually get the materials for the workshop. Can be a challenge, but it's all worth it.
Sometimes I do find within more of my own practice as opposed to like workshop stuff is just getting over the hurdle of skills that sometimes need to be built upon over time. And specifically with the morning glory cordage that is something that took me a very long time. Some people are incredibly good at that. They can catch on immediately. I was not one of those people, was close to giving up a couple times, but yeah, just always push through. And yeah, just you have this vision and you can know it's achievable. You know, other people have done it, and making cordages very much a real thing. But yeah, it's just a matter of getting there physically or mentally, definitely for myself. And I don't know if I necessarily see a difference between like using invasive plants versus by and large versus an artist working with native plants, but just the realization that all plants grow how they like. You can think you have something down to a science, but halfway through, yeah, your cordage, it snaps in half, or your black locust stick just won't burn properly because doesn't really feel like it sometimes. And yeah, I think one thing more specific I'll note is I'll never get over blackberry prickles. Those are always a challenge.
Yeah. You really start to get a feeling for why there are certain materials that do have like a long-standing cultural use, because the way the things that you're physically able to do with each plant are shaped by its material properties. And it's quite clear to me why blackberry bramble was not like a widely used I mean, on top of it having this history with like being having been brought here and potentially being like a hybrid of multiple blackberry bramble plants. So the one we're familiar with, you know, maybe didn't quite exist in its current form ancestrally. But on top of that, it's a very stubborn material to work with. Once you get through the prickles, then you're still dealing with like, it's not a piece of wood, it's its own thing. And I find that with every invasive plant that I learn about, there's something specific that you learn, and it's in your body, it's physical, and that's one of the things that can be so rewarding about it and can be so frustrating and take so much time to master. Touching on similar to what Grace was talking about, ivy is not seasonal, which is great. Blackberry brambles are very seasonal. The time that you can work with them is like the spring through maybe the middle of summer, where you can easily like separate all the different parts that you're going to use. Once it gets into this time of year, I have to have collected as much material as I possibly can earlier in the year. And so that's not just a large workload, but I'm also having to figure out, okay, how do I store these things? And just all of those logistics of moving the large amount of material through my process and being ready for the coming year. It's a really different sense of time than our current culture tends to be familiar with.
See any messages in the chat just yet. So one of our other questions, and I know a bit more about Grace and Josh's background on this, but how can you adapt the eco art you do into like public workshops and help engage the public in doing art projects like this? Maybe I'll start off with Josh this time.
Oh, sure, yeah. My answer might be a bit of a cheat because at the end of the day, the reason why I did get into this was very much to do this public engagement as sort of I guess to explain where I'm coming from with that is I've always had this back and forth throughout my life between art and ecology, and I never really was able to figure out fully if what I wanted to go to post-secondary for was art or something environment related. I did end up choosing art, but always just like since then I've sort of just felt this lack of really engagement, I suppose, within more the environment realm and really being like in nature. And as a third point, in terms of, I guess, workshops and public engagement is, I guess you could say I came from a place of privilege in this, depending on how much you see having a full-time job at 14 as being privileged. But my first job was actually running children's like workshops on art and science and a lot of like summer camp stuff with this one employer. And I did that for about 5 years. So moving out here, just because of how ingrained that was in me at kind of formative years, felt like that was sort of missing too. So it all just sort of came together as one big amalgamation of a bunch of different ingredients in this stew, and really kind of settled in finding this merging ground between all three of those that are able to get me to a place, at least now in my life, with doing this project that I feel pretty happy with. There's always, of course, room for improvement, but yeah, just very much going back to the whole purpose of me really even being involved in eco art, so to speak, was for exactly this.
In terms of engagement, that is definitely something that I struggle with how to get. A big part of that is the process is always changing, and so it's hard to package it up into something that's easy. But the project that I'm working on with Sharon Callis and Earth Hand Gleaners right now is to make the whorls of drop spindles, and that I'm striving to figure out a way to make that portable. And so I've been working on a miniaturized press, portable, something that I can move around on the back of a bike. Right now, I'm building it in a way where it can plug into electric power, but long term, I would love to have a little wind turbine that I can put up off the back of a bike, or a solar panel, or whatever it is, to provide the heating power. But for now, the first level of outreach is just making that like a workshopable project. And then once that's in place, what are the other objects that people that are kind of a draw for people that have a bit of magic to them, because there's lots and lots of ways to make a thing, but the thing has to have meaning. And if you can tie that together, you can tie the meaning and the social time and that time you spend with other people, if you can get it all to come together in one moment, that's much more special than just an object, just an experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Sam with the coming together part of the workshop is probably like the most magic of everything is the creation is part of that. And then the connection that you get from creating something together is something we probably don't do enough in our modern society. And the very first workshop I ran with weaving, basket weaving, was outside, and it was just a spring workshop. I had just taken the workshop to learn how to do the ivy myself, and I'm like, I'm going to try and teach this. So we were outside, it was springtime, we were on the edge of this trail in South Vancouver, and people kept stopping and asking, what are you doing? This looks so interesting. And everyone was curious and engaged. And I'd never had so many people interested, because we do invasive removal events where we're just ripping stuff out. And as Sam and Joshua know, that whole process of ripping out, it can be like a destructive process. And it doesn't really appeal to a lot of people to connect with that. They just see destruction. And sometimes people have even a negative reaction to that. Like, why are you taking out all the ivy? But when they see us making something from it, it helps people connect. And the passersby connect, the people making it together connect. And I really think combining art with eco, with the environment, is the key to getting people interested in the environment. I've seen people who come out to these workshops who might never have come to an invasive pull. They might not know about the environment and invasive removal, but they care about wanting to learn art. So it really brings people out and connecting with plants that would have never come out. So I think it's really important for that connection building and caring for the plants and the planet. I've really enjoyed teaching these workshops, and I think what's nice about them is they can be flexible. Like you can do them all outside, outdoors, completely out in nature. You can do them in the middle of winter if you have an indoor space. You can bring the plants inside and people connect with them in a community center where they don't have a plant. They just can touch the plants in the community center. So it's nice and flexible that way, how you can run it in any place. And yeah, I just really enjoy that process of creation. And I think it's a good bridging point so that people create something new. They go away confident that they've never made that before, and now they can do something new. They can challenge themselves. And maybe they're interested now to learn more about the plants or to come out to another event. And it's a little kind of door has been opened, I guess, to bring them into that world of environmentalism. I hope so. That's my hope.
Cool. Got a couple questions coming in now. So Nicole wanted to know if any of you had any eco art ideas that would be fun for youth in particular.
I think that it's not always the easiest process to start, but the approach of starting from making cordage and then going into ways to use that cordage is a really so Nicole added in the winter time. Okay.
In the winter in Alberta as well, which might be an interesting piece of context for everyone based in Vancouver.
Yeah. The thought I had was just like the ability to take sticks and branches and attach them to each other with cordage should not be underestimated as a way to engage young people. I was that kind of kid, and also when I was in design school, I worked with kids at the Maplewood Gordon Elementary School, and that was the thing that got the biggest response of all the projects we brought to them, was just giving them a whole lot of rope and things to like arrange and like tie together, that kind of approach. But maybe someone else can speak to this too.
I have run a few workshops for children, and yeah, I do think that in terms of winters in Alberta, experience with that is probably wanting to stay inside, I would assume, and I also wouldn't underestimate the what you can get out of nature journaling, and realizing that that would have the restriction on probably very much being inside is bringing forward like dried plants. You could bring forward like doing that, but maybe from video and stuff. Just again, sort of that like, I don't know, the kids would be too psyched about just drawing snow outside. Let's see, what I have run in the past, it is a bit of financial hurdle. And I will say one thing I did forget to know is I did have the privilege with initially starting this project is I had gotten a sizable grant funding through, what was that? I'm totally forgetting the name. The grant funder isn't around anymore, so unfortunately I couldn't even pass off that information to recommend them. They're complete. But yes, is paper making. Tons of tutorials online. In my case, I do involve invasive species with that, but you don't have to necessarily. And you really just throw plant material into that. That's something that can be very accessible for kids to do, even as young as 5, 6. I've gone.
Yes, the paper making Joshua did in partnership with my nonprofit Free the Fern and it was wintertime. It was perfect. It was like, it was so good. We had little kids. My son was only 5 and he joined in and they loved it. You can combine all kinds of different invasive plants within the paper. And so you can actually see them when the paper dries. So it's a mix of like recycled paper, like newsprint, but also in plant material. There's an example Josh was holding up. Fantastic. There's a bookmark.
It's a
So that's
bookmark,
perfect.
sorry, yeah. I'll just
Yeah.
show an example kind of with the finished sort
Yeah,
of
so
thing.
you can
Like
see
we
the
throw
plant
plants in
material.
with a bunch of paper.
Mhm. So that's a great one with kids. You'd need some kind of blender. You need like an iron. You need the netting. What is it called, Joshua? The frame for
Yes, sorry, just got it off to the side here. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, it's the end of the day. My brain is fried. I will find that for you in a second and I will put that in the chat. The name of this. Oh my gosh.
I love how you just had it there though to show. That was like on cue. Perfect.
This is my eco art desk. I'm
Hold
sitting
it
at my
out.
work desk. I got the other desk to the side.
It's great. Yeah, I think the paper making is a perfect one. Other thing connected to what I mentioned earlier was lantern making. So we've run lantern making workshops in the winter that I've run. For kids, a very basic lantern. I don't know if it's truly eco art, but by combining we press flowers, we press invasive flowers, plant species. So you have those pressed and then you keep them for the winter and you incorporate them into the lantern. So the lantern, a very simple lantern, is you blow up a balloon and you put tissue paper on the outside and then you add the plant species on the outside and you add a layer of glue around that. And when it all dries, you pop the balloon and then you can put a handle on and you get a little light inside and it glows. And then you can see all the plants on the outside of the lantern. Yeah, another simple one is jar lanterns with the plants on the outsides of the jars that you pressed. I've recently been doing a few workshops with bookmark making with pressed plants. So little tiny kids as young as like 2 and 3 were helping with that. So you just take a cardboard piece of paper, thick cardstock, and then you take your pressed invasive plant species or examples of native plants. And this can be an example to show native versus invasive, and you can make a bookmark for each. And it's just to teach you about the plant species. And then you just glue them onto your bookmark and you have the nice little bookmark. Yeah, so those are really basic ones for kids to do. Yeah, lots of fun with the little ones. I've actually had a little kid sit in my basket weaving too. She was only 4, so she couldn't make the basket, but her mom was making the basket and she sat beside and she took a bunch of the ivy and she was just weaving it together herself, like making up little knots and making up little twirls. And she was so proud of herself. She was like holding up this whole construction she made out of like twisting the ivy together. So literally she created her own art. So just leaving it open-ended, she did that. So it's possible.
Yeah, so a lot of different options out there. I personally really liked the look of all the lanterns that like Still Moon Art Society and stuff made. I've never actually managed to make it to an event, but the pictures look quite pretty of seeing the lanterns out there, especially if you get those little electric tea candles that can be all those different colors. It'd be really beautiful. I also had a thought. I was reminded of when you showed the strand of ivy, I was reminded of a story I heard from Matthew Williams, who is a Squamish educator who, for people who were in person at the last session, he did a plant walk with us in Stanley Park, and he talked about a traditional Squamish game where they would pull the leaves off of the fronds while holding their breath to see who could get the most. And I wonder if little kids would like that for the ivy, like processing the ivy beforehand and stuff, and could make a bit of a game inspired by the traditional Squamish game out of it or something like that. Personally, too, if you're able to go outside, a lot of the kids I work with love ripping ivy out of the ground. You can hardly hold them back as soon as they know they're about to do it. So move on to Sherry's question. So hopefully we can get to everyone's. And feel free to correct me in the chat if I'm misinterpreting this question, Sherry, but I believe Sherry's asking about what thoughts do you have about looking into different plants or trees that can be made into art for climate resilience? So I don't know if that means things like carbon storage by using invasive wood materials or things like that. But if you have any thoughts about making eco art specifically geared towards climate resilience, like small acts of it.
Yeah, that is a huge focus for me. I have tried to figure out I was going on a kick for a while of thinking that, yeah, we just need to make everything out of this material that is not wanted otherwise, the invasive plants. And going down that route, I'm really glad I had that thought. But then what I actually realized is that the much more important part of climate resilience is the way that we're actually interacting with the materials that are still there, with the plants and animals that are still in that ecosystem that we've gone in and affected. So in my work, I make a single table out of it ends up being about like 3.5 or 4 kilograms of material, which I'm like, great, I've done my very best to sequester some carbon into someone's house. But way more important than that is if that entire landscape can benefit in some way that goes beyond that carbon storage. And that includes the social component, like Grace was talking about, of people just stopping and experiencing a place in a different way. That happens so many times when I'm gathering materials or doing any project out where people can see me. People are super curious, and if you're like just cutting brambles and organizing them into a pile, suddenly it looks different from an invasive pull, and people get a lot more interested, and they're wondering like, what's that for? And that, I think, is one of the ways that the real work of figuring out that climate resilience is going to come in, is getting people's relationship to these places that have been treated as like disposable places, getting us all to shift and see that like actually we're surrounded by places that could be really like good for the soul and full of life and all of these things if we start telling each other, no, we're going to value this, we are going to value this. So yeah.
Yeah, speaking about climate resilience, on that note, I took a thermometer and put it under a Douglas fir tree in the trail that's right behind where I live. And then I moved it about 100 feet away into a street, open concrete street area. And it was 10 degrees of difference between those two areas. And one of the reasons I do what I do is to protect this trail system, because a lot of these trees are being threatened by ivy climbing them. And once the ivy consumes the tree, those trees can be killed by the ivy. So by protecting those trees, removing the ivy on the ground floor, and then cutting ivy at the chest height of the tree to protect it from being consumed, we lead to more trees being there to shade all of the people who use the trail. In the summer months, we have seniors, we have kids, people walking their dogs, and they enjoy having that 10-degree difference of temperature for the summer months. I mean, and a lot of people don't have the luxury of having air conditioning even in their homes, so they have to go outside. So those trails matter to people. And the work we do is protecting that trail system. When we don't steward, unfortunately, there's nothing to stop that ivy. There's nothing naturally in our environment that's going to prevent it from continuing to climb the trees. So other than that stewardship volunteer effort. And in our work with Free the Fern, we've removed 50 tons of invasive plants in the last 2.5 years since starting. And we've seen a big transformation in that trail system. We've had 1,400 native plants we've put back in, and we are seeing so many more birds coming through the trails. We've had photographers coming out photographing the birds and noticing a big difference. We're so many new, like we have the woodpeckers coming in, pecking on the exposed wood now that there's not these beds of ivy covering everything. It's allowing, like there's mushrooms coming up all over the place right now on the fallen wood. So it's just allowing that biodiversity to come back into the space. So from a monoculture of 1 or 2 plant species, you have a whole bunch of variety, hundreds of plants coming in now that are different types of native species that feed the pollinators and the birds. So I think the climate resiliency that we do with this invasive removal is to protect forested spaces like that for the future of our cities and our planet. So by making art out of it, it's like a win-win for everyone. We win for the planet. We win by creating together. We win by community. It's all winning. And I think it just feels good to be part of something like that because everyone benefits, including nature, right? So.
Yeah, as is the case with all three of us, Grace and Sam as well, is just I guess a bit of piggybacking off the already existing work of restoration and invasive removals. And um, I guess what it comes down to for me in the small part I could see myself playing in this is the teaching aspect. Maybe not so much even teaching, but just creating these connections and asking these questions. And to use Grace's words earlier, is uh allowing this like door to open and different ways for people to view things. And I guess I see it as more of a circular economy at very small scale, albeit, but just showing people these other options and that new things aren't necessarily needed when, yeah, you have these plants that are essentially going to waste otherwise.
Cool. Yeah. We were talking about it a bit before the session, but I've also noticed that eco art has been really good at bringing in some people who maybe haven't been interested in ecology and stewardship before. So I feel like it's a roundabout way, but it helps get more and more people engaged with the environment who might not be interested in just ripping it out, but maybe they'll support the artist initiatives or these other groups. And I found it's a very good way to build more connections with the local community. So let me move on. So Sandra had a question building off of what Joshua mentioned in his part about how invasive plants are quite often seen as the enemy, but they're just growing. They didn't have any choice in coming here. And so she was wondering, how do you bring respect for that truth in these practices? Specifically, she's connecting how um, there's some fear mongering around invasives about how outsiders don't belong here, and how that ties into xenophobia and the kind of connection that could be there. So how do you bring respect for that in your art practices? If that makes sense.
Sure, I can start with that one. Is let's see, a little bit of the respect definitely comes, I think, internalized with myself is showing it the best way that I can. Again, just trying my best not to waste as much of the plant that would otherwise go to waste. And that is something I do try to bring up within the workshops and any sort of like engagements I have with this, is kind of questioning like, is this plant necessarily bad, evil, whatever sort of words you might someone could assign to an invasive species, when it can be used for good, for creating art? Is they're here whether they should be or not. It is just where they have happened to sprout, and again, it's not their choice. And we can take from that is to realize that there are effects that these plants have on the local environment that are more they how am I trying to word this? I kind of lost my train of thought there. Sorry, give me a second. Is, yeah, they do have effects, but there's also ways in which the necessary kind of mitigation of that can involve not just killing the plant. Hopefully that answers.
I had a little bit to add to this. So I come from more the Western science background. I write a lot of technical reports and provide advice to people working on invasive species management. And I like to think of invasive species as they aren't harmful because of what they are, they're harmful because of where they are. And so all the plants we're talking about perhaps have great utility and use. Of course, they do in their native environment because they've evolved harmoniously with many other species. There could actually be a session just like this happening right now on the other side of the world, where they're speaking about some of our beloved native plants because they've been introduced into other regions. So by definition, to be invasive, you have to be from somewhere else and you have to be doing some sort of significant harm. And so this whole phenomenon of invasive species is because humans have moved things around. So I sort of use that definition when people say, yeah, like, well, why are you ripping these out? They have kind of every right to be here. Well, humans invented this conservation issue. It's because intentionally or unintentionally, we've moved things around, and we're mostly talking about plants today, and many of them have come from where our settlers have come from, other continents, and we don't expect those plants to have made it to Canada on their own. So we've moved these things around in ways that they could never have moved otherwise. But yeah, very, very interesting conversation, especially people in minority groups or folks that might be happening upon a community weed pull or something like that. Sometimes if they're familiar with the plant in their native environment, it can lead to some really interesting discussions. There's also some cultural sensitivity to what we name things. So there are common names and scientific names that we use in the Western scientific community that are highly offensive to some people. And so science is trying to catch up and have better language to discuss these things, so that people from different regions don't feel like they're being blamed or for making them feel responsible for the invasive species.
Yeah, I was just going to add, sorry, Sam, cut you off, but similar to Tasha, I do a lot of, my background is all in the removals and stuff, and we do a lot of these private events in Stanley Park, a lot of events in general, my public events, my private events. And in all of these, especially because if any of you've been to Stanley Park, you know how many, it's a hard park to know every plant in. There's so many random plants from all over the place in gardens or on the trails and stuff. So I always like to emphasize that difference between introduced species and the invasive species and the harm being there. So I kind of view it a lot more as mitigating that harm. Like I point out almost every time we meet right next to like an Alberta blue spruce. And I'm like, are we in Alberta right now? No, that spruce is just chilling. It's doing nothing. Or around Lost Lagoon, we actually have like a lot of dawn redwoods and stuff, which is quite interesting. Not from here, but they're still around, artificially planted a few decades back, I imagine. But so I like to make sure people understand that we're not just here removing everything that's not from here and targeting that. We're trying to mitigate the harm to the native plants. And we specifically base where we work based off of, at least my point of view, while I've been in charge at SPES, is going to the areas the most hard hit by these invasive species or other stressors as well. Like this year, we're working a lot at Beaver Lake where people just hang out in the summer and impacted the soil. So we're mitigating that harm as well. So we're trying to reduce the amount of harm causing, and some of the things that we like to encourage is leaving some of the invasive material behind that won't spread. So like when we do blackberry, we leave the shoots behind to return to the soil as much as we can, and we just take the roots out because the shoots won't grow. And that's a nice way to keep mulch on the ground and return those nutrients and all those other things. So that's kind of how I approach it. That's best, but I think it's important to always be open to learning and building and developing on keeping these different point of views in mind.
Yeah. An idea I came across a while ago, definitely is one of the things I think about a lot when I'm trying to figure out this question of how to like modify my language. So in the chat, somebody said they say destructive introduced species instead of invasive species. I think we're all kind of trying to figure those pieces out, and we haven't necessarily settled. But one of the analogies I've heard that I really like is that when humans come in, when certain humans come in, we often will take everything off the surface of the soil. And that's actually the hardest thing for the soil often. And so these species that we're treating as invasive, like they're most of the time capitalizing on the ways that we have acted. And secondly, it's scar tissue. It's an attempt for the earth to heal and cover itself and not be exposed to sun and retain moisture, all of these things. And so there needs to be a certain amount of respect for the service that that plant provided for that local area, and recognition that it's not deciding to be out of whack with its neighbors. As many people have said already, it was introduced And so trying to bring that back and figure out how we can take action in ways that don't reinforce like a xenophobia or things like that is, I think, has a lot to do with the amount of time that we allow for consideration of these things. That like when we're proposing strategies to address a particular site or a particular plant, we need to do it with a type of rigor that is not super familiar to the way we do most things. And so bringing in the scientific perspective on things so we can talk about what this actually means, and bringing in the metaphysical parts of it, not as like you know, a way to make ourselves feel better, but actually to recognize that those are truths that come from other knowledge systems. And yeah, like taking the time and space to understand what's going on many levels, and saying we don't just need to solve, we need to figure out how to do a practice every day, a practice that reinforces our goals, that makes our places more beautiful and livable and happy. So I'm done.
That's lovely, Sam. I want to share that sometimes people connect with an emotional connection with plants from where they're from. So I'll have people come up to me and say, I'm from England and I love seeing all this ivy here. It just reminds me of home and I have such a good feeling when I see it. So like that there is an emotional connection some people have with home connected to their plants. I've also had another woman who comes up the trail and she sees a plant that's from Asia. And she said, please, I see this plant. We collect it for food in my home. Like, just please, can you not take that out? Because they have memories of collecting it with their grandparents back home. Like, so there's these emotional bonds people have with plants, maybe from their home country. And I think the way that we can work on that, not to dismiss that, because that is a valuable bond they have with their plant, but to build new bonds with the plants that are native to our area. So I'm surprised how many people volunteer with us who are new to the country. So just last invasive pull, I had a family of 4 who just came to Canada and they wanted to volunteer with their 2 little kids and the 2 parents. And they were so interested to know the names of the plants, the native plants. And they said, we wanted to come to learn about Canadian culture. And I have this happen a lot. And I think they were so excited to learn. And then they were talking to each other in their own language and sharing the name that I shared with them. And they were developing a connection with the country they've just moved to. And I think as people develop relationships with plants, then they have an emotional connection, and we can build on that with education when we are learning about plants and sharing that knowledge without dismissing their previous connection with plants in their own country. And I think we can just build on a new connection that they can have here. And I think that maybe can help people understand the plants here better, because they don't have a history with these plants. Even I spent most of my life growing up in Canada, and I never had a relationship with these plants either, because it's not something my parents taught me, because my parents didn't have a relationship with these native plants either. So I think these are new relationships a lot of us are building with the plants. And that's something that now that I can pass on to my son. But I think these are new things. A lot of these I've learned from Indigenous knowledge sharers too. So we have to draw on Indigenous knowledge sharers because they have a history with the plants. But building those relationships with the plants, now I love them. Now they like, I have a saying, if you can name it, you can love it. And now I walk down the trail and I can name the plants and I love the plants because I connect with the plants. But, you know, if you don't have that relationship, you don't feel for that. So I think it's building relationships. I think that's what it's about with the people and the plants.
Yeah, a lot of great answers there. I think we're almost out of time because it's 7:59, so I don't know if we have time for any more questions, but I think those were all great answers. Can definitely relate with trying to help people build new relationships, or even like I have some volunteers who are an older couple from China, and we've been removing some bamboo recently, and not to like tell us to stop, but they just shared why it's culturally important. And so I think listening and learning about these plants and learning about these other perspectives that I don't have, and maybe you don't have about the plants, is another way to respect. Like I have scars all over my shins from blackberry. I still respect the plant. It grows so aggressively. It's very impressive. Or like giant hog, super dangerous. I think it's very cool that it manages that. So finding these ways to still respect the plant, even though knowing that maybe it needs to be taken out of this area so the native plants have a chance to survive, is kind of how I view it. But yep, it's right on 8. So I think that will be the last question we'll get to tonight.
Thank you so much to our panelists. This was a really thoughtful discussion. Thanks to all of you for joining us from home, wherever you are, for your questions and for giving us your time tonight. And hopefully you will join us in November for our Youth Perspectives and Stewardship session. And with that, I would like to say good night, and you'll be getting an email from me in the next week with links to all the fun stuff that we shared today. Thank you and good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.